Welcome back, everyone.
Back again.
Last time we got into some design fundamentals like contrast and emphasis.
The basics.
And we all learned a thing or two. Those ideas, they apply no matter what you're designing. Could be a poster, a website, anything.
Absolutely the foundations.
But let's be honest, we're all here for one reason, right?
To smash that SQA higher graphic communication exam.
Exactly. We're going deeper into balance, proportion, mass, proximity, and value. These are things that professional designers. They use them every day. But you might not even realize they're there until you start, really looking closely.
It's like, how do they do that?
Yeah, the magic behind it.
And that's what we're doing today. It's like revealing the secrets, eh? So that you can use them in your own work.
Exactly. We're going to break down these principles, show you how they work, and how they can make your SQA work stand out to those examiners. So grab your sketchbooks, everyone. Let's get started.
First up, balance.
All right, balance.
Think of it like a seesaw, right? You want your design to feel visually stable. You don't want it to feel like it's about to tip over.
Well, you don't want it wonky.
Exactly. If it's all wonky, well, those examiners are going to notice.
So how do we stop things from being, wonky?
Well, there's three main types of balance.
Okay, let's hear them.
Symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial. We'll start with symmetrical. It's like a mirror image, very formal, very structured. You see it a lot in, those government posters, you know? The ones that are all over town. They look serious, official.
Right, I know the ones you mean.
And they often use symmetrical balance to make it, have that kind of feel.
Right, I get it. It's
Yeah.
not just about aesthetics. It's about communicating something specific.
Absolutely spot on. Now, asymmetrical balance is a bit more, I don't know, how would you say it? Edgy.
Edgy, yeah.
Yeah.
A bit more modern, maybe.
Modern. It's all about creating this sort of visual weight. It's like imagine a jazz solo.
Okay, jazz solo.
Different elements have different weights visually, but they all work together. So think about those cool movie posters, right? You've got the main character off to one side, and then the title and the credits balancing them out on the other.
Right, and you get that sense of movement, don't you? That little bit of tension that makes your eye move around the design.
Exactly. And then lastly, we've got radial balance. This is where everything sort of revolves around a central point. Think of a sunflower, a dartboard, maybe even a Tunnix tea cake,
I'm Scottish, of course I know a Tunnix tea cake.
It can be quite dramatic, this kind of balance, but it can also be a bit tricky to pull off well. You don't want your design to be spinning out of control.
Right, it needs to be controlled. So
Yeah.
it sounds like radial balance is best saved for projects where you really want to make a statement.
I use it wisely. Now, here's a wee tip for you. When you look at those past SQA, higher graphic communication projects, the exemplar material, you'll see examples of all three types of balance. Try to figure out why the designers made those choices. What feeling were they going for? Analyzing those choices. Well, that's how you start to develop your own design language.
I like that. So it's not just about knowing the definitions, it's about understanding how to actually use these techniques in a meaningful way.
Right. Okay, ready to move on to proportion.
Yeah, let's talk about proportion.
Okay.
Now, I think this is where a lot of people get tripped up, especially in those timed exams. When you're under pressure,
It can be stressful.
is it just about making sure things are the right size? Or is there more to it?
It's about making sure things are the right size in relation to each other.
Yeah.
That's the key. You wouldn't want a tiny wee logo on a massive billboard, would you?
No, it would just look strange.
Exactly. Strange. So proportion is all about understanding scale and emphasis. A larger element, it's naturally going to draw the eye first. Think about a magazine, right? Big headlines, smaller body text. It's like a roadmap for your eyes. Tells you where to look.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not just about headlines and text, is it? Say, if I'm drawing a figure and the head is way bigger than the body, that's going to look a bit odd, right?
Aye, the SQA markers, they definitely notice that. And the reports, they actually mention that students struggle with proportion in their figure drawing, so it's something to really pay attention to.
So even if you get all the details perfect, if the proportions are off, it's going to throw the whole thing out of balance. It's all about that visual harmony.
You've got it.
Speaking of visual harmony, let's move on to the next principle.
Mass.
Mass. Now, this is where things get a bit more,
A bit more conceptual.
conceptual.
I was going to say mass. Isn't that something you learn about in physics?
You can put the calculators away.
Okay, good. In design, mass, it's not about actual weight. It's about how heavy or light something feels visually.
I see how it looks.
Right, visually. So you have a big, solid black square, has a lot of visual mass. But a thin, delicate line, that's got very little.
Right, like the black square feels really grounded. It's got a presence.
Exactly. And a thin line, it feels like it could just float away.
I get that.
And you can actually use that to your advantage.
Yeah.
So just like a big, bold headline grabs your attention, an element with more visual mass, it's going to stand out more.
So it's a way to guide the viewer's attention.
Exactly. Now, here's where folks make a mistake, a common mistake, right? They think more mass, it always means filling up every bit of space. But sometimes, well, sometimes the empty space around an object, that negative space, it can actually make it feel even more powerful.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like giving your design room to breathe.
Precisely. Less is more, as they say.
Hey, right. Sometimes less is more. Okay, so we've talked about balance, proportion, mass. What's next?
Proximity, or as it's sometimes called, unity.
Proximity. Okay. Now that sounds like it's all about keeping things close together. But why is that so important in design?
Well, imagine you're looking at a flyer, right? And the text is just scattered all over the place. It's like trying to find your way out of a maze, blindfolded. Your brain doesn't know where to go first.
It's giving me a headache just thinking about it.
Right, it's a mess.
Yeah.
But when you group related elements together, it creates a sense of order. Like labeling all those boxes in your attic, suddenly everything makes sense.
Ah, so it's about organization.
Visual organization. And that's what proximity does for your designs. It creates this visual hierarchy, makes it easy for the viewer to understand what's important. It's like guiding the eye, like a wee path through the design.
So proximity is about making sure your information is organized in a way that makes sense visually.
Exactly. And this is something that the SQA markers, they're looking for this, right? They want to see that you're not just randomly scattering things on the page. You've thought about it. You've thought about how everything works together, how it leads the viewer's eye through the design.
Right. You're creating a story.
A visual story eye.
Yeah.
And like a good story, it needs a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Okay, so we've got balance, proportion, mass, and proximity. What's their last principle for today?
Value.
Value. Now, I hear that word and I think about things like trust and honesty. What does that have to do with design?
Well, in design, value refers to the lightness or darkness of a color.
Okay, so not the price tag.
No, not the price. It's what gives your designs depth and dimension. Makes them look three-dimensional, you know?
Right, like a black and white photograph.
Yeah.
Where you get all the detail from those different shades of gray.
Exactly. It's not just about having a lot of colors. It's about how those colors relate to each other in terms of their lightness and darkness. Think about a landscape painting. The distant mountains, they might be a really pale blue, almost hazy, but the trees in the foreground, they're going to be a much darker green. That contrast in value, that's what creates that illusion of depth.
That makes sense.
And it's something that the SQA markers, they're looking for that. They want to see that you understand how to use value to create mood, to highlight certain areas, to make your designs just pop.
So it's a really powerful tool.
It is, And that brings us to the end of our first set of principles.
But wait, there's more. We've got more design goodness coming up after the break.
Stay tuned. Right, so before we get into the next batch of design principles, let's talk about something that trips up a lot of students in the SQA Higher Graphic Communication exam.
What's that?
Those dreaded explain questions.
Ah, those explain questions. Yeah.
They always seem to throw folks for a loop, don't they?
They do, yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of students seem to be losing hearts because they're not explaining their design choices clearly enough.
Really?
Yeah, the examiners, they're looking for specific things. They want you to show them that you really understand these design principles and how they impact the overall design.
Okay.
It's not enough to just say, oh, I used asymmetrical balance because it looks nice.
So you need to give more detail.
Exactly, detail. You need to show them that you've actually thought about it.
That there was a reason.
A reason. It wasn't just a random choice.
So what kind of things should students be saying in these explain questions?
They need to connect cause and effect.
Cause and effect, okay.
So instead of just saying, I used asymmetrical balance, you'd say something like, I used asymmetrical balance to create a sense of movement and energy, drawing the viewer's eye to the product image on the left side of the poster.
Oh, I see. So you're not just saying what you did, but why you did it.
Exactly. And what impact it has on the overall design.
It's like those football commentators.
Sure.
They don't just say, he kicked the ball.
Yeah.
They say, he kicked the ball with his left foot, curling it around the defender into the top corner of the net.
Ha ha, brilliant.
It's all about the detail.
Right, the detail. And that's what the examiners are looking for.
So it's not just about balance, is it? It applies to all the principles we've been talking about.
It does, Whenever you're explaining your work, always think about the why behind your decisions.
Okay, explain questions. Got it. What other areas are students struggling with?
Proportion.
Proportion.
And this actually comes up in both the question paper and the assignment.
Oh, really?
The reports specifically mention that students have issues with proportion in their sketches.
In the sketches.
So you might have this beautifully detailed drawing of a hand,
Uh-huh.
but if it's twice the size of the head in your figure drawing, well, that's going to cost you marks.
So attention to detail is important, but it's also about understanding how those details fit together in the bigger picture.
Absolutely, spot on. It's like building a house.
Okay.
You need to make sure the foundations are strong before you start putting on the roof.
I like that analogy.
And that actually brings us to another point that's highlighted in the SQA reports.
Okay, what's that?
The importance of using a wide range of desktop publishing features.
Oh, the technical stuff.
The technical side of things. Things like transparency, text along a path, reverse text, all that good stuff.
Right.
The examiners, they want to see that you're not just using the basic tool.
They want to see you can push the boundaries.
Exactly. They want to see that you can push those creative boundaries.
It's about showing that you've got the technical skills.
But it's not just about using every single feature in the software just for the sake of it.
It needs to have a purpose.
It does. Just like with any design principle, you need to be intentional with your choices.
Right. There needs to be a reason.
Why are you using drop shadows? Why are you wrapping the text around that image? Think about the effect you're trying to achieve.
So it's about being strategic with those choices.
Exactly.
You're not just decorating the page.
No, you're communicating a message.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, speaking of communicating a message, let's talk about rhythm.
Right. Rhythm. Bring on the bagpipes.
Not quite. But the reports mention that students often confuse rhythm with unity.
I can see how that could happen.
Yeah.
They both sort of sound like they're about creating a sense of flow.
They are, but there's a key difference.
Okay, what is it?
Unity is about making things feel like they belong together,
Okay.
like using a consistent color palette or typeface.
Right.
But rhythm, that's about creating a sense of movement and direction.
Okay, I think I need an example.
All right, so think about a traditional Scottish sealid.
Love a good sealid.
You've got the music, the steps, the patterns.
Right.
It all flows together in a very predictable but dynamic way.
Right, just keeps going.
And you can achieve that same feeling in your designs.
Really?
So imagine a magazine layout, right? With a repeating pattern of headlines, images, and text.
Okay.
That repetition, it creates a visual rhythm.
So it's like a visual beat.
Exactly. And it makes it easy for the reader to follow along.
I like that, a visual beat.
So to really impress those SQA markers, you need to show them that you understand all these principles and that you can actually apply them skillfully in your work.
Okay, so we need to understand the why. We need to practice applying the principles. Anything else?
Speaking of practice, one thing that really stood out in the SQA reports was the emphasis on sketching.
Sketching? Really?
Sketching.
I thought everything was digital these days.
It seems like the examiners, they really value good old-fashioned hand-drawn work.
Interesting.
It's all about thinking visually, working through ideas quickly and efficiently without relying on those digital crutches.
So it's about getting those initial ideas down on paper.
Exactly. Sometimes I think we rely a bit too much on technology these days.
We do, yeah.
We forget the power of a good pencil and paper.
I agree with you there.
And the SQA markers, they know that they're looking for evidence of your understanding, your ability to interpret and represent a 3D object on a 2D surface.
They want to see your skills?
They want to see your skills. They're not fooled by those digital shortcuts.
Right, you can't just use a filter to make it look good.
Exactly. It's like those baking shows where they say no shop-bought pastry.
I love those shows.
They want to see that you can do it from scratch.
So we need to practice those hand-drawn skills.
You do. Resist the urge to rely on those digital tools for your sketches.
Okay, good advice.
Practice your hand-drawn skills. It'll pay off in the long run, I promise you.
So we need to understand the why. We need to practice applying those principles. We need to hone those sketching skills. Got it. Anything else?
One last thing before we move on.
Okay, I'm listening.
The SQA reports also stress the importance of drawing standards, protocols, and conventions.
Okay.
The grammar of design, if you will.
The grammar of design.
I like that.
Think about it. You might have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't know how to communicate them effectively, they're lost.
Right. It's like you've got this amazing song in your head,
Uh-huh.
but you don't know how to write the music down.
Exactly. It's like trying to write a cracking tune, but you cannot read music.
It would be a
A
disaster.
disaster. So what kind of things are we talking about here? Like different line types and symbols and all that?
Exactly. Things like dimensioning line weights, symbols. These are all part of a shared language that designers use to
Uh,
communicate their ideas clearly and accurately.
right, like a universal language.
A universal language.
Yeah.
And it's especially important for those technical drawings.
The Kegel drive.
If you're designing a product that needs to be manufactured, those measurements, those specifications, they need to be spot on.
Right, there's no room for error.
No room for error. Imagine if you missed a decimal point in the measurements for a bridge.
Oh, that's a scary thought. A wonky bridge.
A recipe for disaster. And that's why the SQA exams are so strict about this area.
You want to make sure you know the rules.
They want to make sure you've got a good grasp of these conventions.
Okay, so how can students make sure they're up to speed with all this technical stuff?
Well, the good news is the SQA, they provide a brilliant resource.
Oh, what's that?
Appendix 2 in the Higher Graphic Communication course specification.
Right, the course specification.
It's like the design Bible.
I remember that. We used to call it the Big Book of Design.
Ha ha! Aye! It's full of all the key terms and conventions you need to know.
It's a good resource.
It is, but don't just skim through it. Take the time to really understand the concepts.
Right, really study it.
Practice applying them in your drawings. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
Like learning a new language.
Exactly. At first you're stumbling over every word, but eventually you start to dream in that language.
So dream design. I love that.
Oh, what?
Well, we've covered a lot today, haven't we? Balance, proportion, mass, proximity, value, those explain questions, sketching skills, technical conventions.
It's a lot to take in.
It's enough to make your head spin.
Aye, but didn't be overwhelmed. It's all about taking things one step at a time. Remember those SQA markers? They're not expecting you to be a seasoned design pro.
Right, we're still learning.
They're looking for potential for that spark of creativity.
So don't be afraid to experiment.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
So keep sketching, keep experimenting, keep pushing those creative boundaries.
And most importantly, have fun with it. Design is a fantastic way to express yourself, to solve problems, to make the world a wee bit better.
I love that.
So go out there and make us proud.
Well said. That's all from us for now. Until next time, keep those creative juices flowing.